You might be wondering about the background today, why I'm using a wheat field and a barn. Well, hang in there with me and wait to hear today's parable, and then you'll figure that out. So, with that said, let's jump right in. One of the challenges we face in unpacking Jesus' parables is our desire to want to oversimplify them. And today's parable is a great example of that. For in the parable, we hear the story of a rich farmer who had come across an unexpected windfall or harvest. Now, those unexpected resources had raised a wonderful dilemma for that farmer: what to do with those resources. In just a moment, you'll hear how he chose to resolve the dilemma. Now, as the parable unfolds, many listeners are going to be tempted to say that the parable is only about how we manage our resources or money. But if you listen more carefully to the parable, not just with ears but heart, you'll discover that it's about so much more than just money. So hear now the parable found in Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. And I'll be reading today from the Common English Bible. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then Jesus said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And then he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns, like the one behind me, and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. And then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?" This, Jesus said, is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. And thus ends the reading. So now that you've heard the parable, have you figured out what it's really about? Well, figuring that out is a little bit more complicated for us modern folks than it would have been for Jesus' original audience, for they would have known something we didn't. Namely, that the inheritance practices of the day, for those of Jesus' faith, had already been spelled out very clearly as to who got what. Deuteronomy 21, 16 and 17 declared that the older brother would always get 2/3 of the inheritance, and the younger just 1/3. And while the story doesn't tell us exactly which brother it was who yelled out from the crowd, it doesn't really matter. For whoever it was who yelled out wanted the same thing: more. That little four-letter word, more, points us to a deeper meaning of the parable, which is hidden in the pronouns Jesus used in telling it. And in pointing us toward that hidden meaning, Audrey West notes this: the man in the parable is so self-centered that he could not see beyond what he considered to be his harvest, his barns, and even his own life. Well, what's wrong with the use of possessive pronouns? We modern folks ask. They're everywhere. Say we who live in a society that worships at the altar of the individual. Well, here's that barrier then in understanding the parable then and how it applies to now. For you see, Jesus' culture was not based upon the supremacy of the individual and the individual's rights. No. It was based on the foundational importance of community And that just wasn't true socially, it was true economically as well. Back then, if one person became richer and richer, Richard Carlson noted in his commentary, it meant others would conversely become poorer and poorer, because economics was a zero-sum game. Back then, they knew something that we seem to have forgotten, that one's life was always intertwined with the lives of others, as well as our life with God. And therein lies the key to figuring out what today's parable is really all about, one's sense of perspective. For you see, the more that we focus on the me and the my in life, the less room we have for the we and the ours. When we start changing the pronouns we use, a seismic shift begins to occur in the way we see the world. For when we use those pronouns like me and my, we are telling the world that we are responsible for what has come to us, that we have earned it, that we are entitled to it. But when we change those pronouns in the direction of the plural, we begin to acknowledge a deeper truth. We begin to acknowledge that the ultimate source of the harvest and blessing lies someplace far greater than just ourselves. And because of that, we need to start thinking differently about what it is that we do with those resources. I learned that lesson a hard and in a very beautiful way over the last 2.5 years. So let me tell you what happened. As I was working with my tax advisor to prepare my 2019 returns in the winter of 2020, we discovered a mistake that had been made for several years in how I approached my health insurance coverage. We realized that I had, in fact, been eligible for state assistance with the paying of my health insurance premiums. And what we found was by no means a little oversight. We found that I would have an extra $650 in my pocket once I got that help. And as for someone who lived from paycheck to paycheck, like so many of us, boy, that was a huge deal. I was every bit as ecstatic as the rich man in today's parable, thinking about what I might do with my extra money. Notice those pronouns. But then something happened that rocked my world. COVID hit, and a friend was worried about me being alone all those hours and days locked up behind doors by myself. So she made what she thought was an innocent suggestion. Why don't you get a dog? Well, I was still mourning the loss of my previous dog 6 months earlier. So I said, no, absolutely not. She came back by saying, okay, then, why don't you just get a foster dog from an animal rescue? I thought about it. That appeared to be a win-win scenario. For not only could I help a dog in desperate need, it wouldn't affect my monthly windfall that I already began to stock away in barns. For I knew that the animal shelter would cover the expenses for the rescue animal. And I jumped in and I got that dog. And over the course of 6 weeks, the first 6 weeks, it became apparent that this dog would never get adopted due to its severe health issues. And so on my birthday that year, I decided to adopt him. And I set out on a life-changing journey. As the days passed and I sought out every available resource to fix his problems, I noticed that something was happening to my resources in the barn. They were diminishing rapidly. For the average cost of taking care of him was over $1,300 a month, more than twice what I had expected to save on my healthcare premium. And yet, as I exchanged one set of pronouns, the me and the mine, for another, the ours and the yours, everything began to change. I became so connected with this amazing creature who had been completely neglected for the first 10 years of its life. And every day that I woke up and looked over into his eyes, I saw a reflection of what true gratitude and true grace looked like. In the process of taking on that challenge for 26 months before he passed July 20th, an entire network of people around the world rallied around me. They would check in regularly and ask, "How's Max?" And many who had never before paid attention to this thing called rescue were now not only learning about animal rescues, but giving to them. I was feeling pretty good about myself and my newfound perspective on resources and their management until about 10 days ago. For you see, in the 10 days following Max's death, I sat back down and fell into my old habits. I started to crunch numbers and think to myself what I could do with all of this money, all of this harvest that had made itself available. But then a few days ago, as I was taking a drink of cold water in the hot summer sun, I felt a surge of pain in a rear tooth. Because I felt it reminded me that I had put off some much needed dental work as I was caring for Max and dealing with those expenses. So I made a call to the dentist in order to fix the problem. And sure enough, I learned that it would cost at least 2 months of what I had been spending to take care of Max in order to get it fixed. Oh. My initial response to the news was anger and frustration. I thought to myself, why can't I ever do what I want with my resources? But this time I finally caught myself in my use of pronouns. I began to shift or correct those pronouns. And because of that, over time, I actually found a place to gratitude as I realized that I was blessed with the resources I need in order to alleviate the pain. And in doing so, I would even get to reach out and support a web of healthcare providers in my own neighborhood who needed the support, who had helped already so many. Which takes us to the question Jesus left us hanging with at the end of the parable. What does it mean to be rich toward God? Well, Patricia Lowell writes, in order to do that, you need to redefine the word barn. For you see, in our world, a barn would represent something like a savings account, a set of investments, or a portfolio. And while there's certainly room for all those things, the kind of barn that Jesus points us to is one that's far greater than any of those. Patricia Lowell wrote these words, when all is said and done, the parable invites all of us to put our trust in something more durable than the volatile fluctuations of a global market. Instead of banking on more and larger barns, God instead invites all into the eternal economy of Christ's grace and mercy. Such beautiful words, such a beautiful reminder. And so, friends, as we go forth to manage those resources with which we've been blessed, may God help us to remember just which economy it is that we are investing. For when we invest in that economy of grace and mercy, when we can finally grow to trust that we will have what we need, not want, but need, and when we need it, we can then gain a perspective on things that can never be depleted. A perspective that's not based on a zero-sum game, which pits winners against losers, rich against poor, Rather, we will find a perspective that helps us see the abundance or blessings before us, and then grow in our desire to share those blessings with others. May it be so. Amen.